Hello, and welcome to another edition of Issues That Matter. And today, being July 29th, last time I checked, we have a wonderful guest on to talk about an issue that probably is not discussed all that frequently, and possibly, maybe it should be discussed more frequently, because it certainly is an issue that families have to deal with. I'd like to introduce you to Susan GIAMBALVO.
Hi.
Thank you, Susan, for being on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
And Susan is the program director for the Center for Grieving Children, which has two locations, one in Sanford and one up in Portland, as I recollect.
Yes, that's correct.
And I did not get that confused. Thank you very much. Susan, tell me, how did you come about becoming involved with grieving children?
Well, throughout my professional career, I've always been involved with different kinds of social service agencies that serve children and families. And I think this was just a natural extension of that work. I saw, as people do, I saw the job posting and I thought, that sounds really interesting and like a wonderful place. And from the moment that I walked through the door at my first interview, I just continued to be impressed. That I loved the fact that it was about bringing children and families together, that it was about working in relationship and groups and communities. I loved all the community involvement that there is from all of the volunteers and all the people that support the center in the many different ways. Yep. And I wanted to be a part of it.
How long have you been doing it?
7 years. Yep, I've been there for 7 years now.
And what type of training do you have to go through? I know we talked about acronyms before.
Mm-hmm.
You're a licensed clinical
social worker. Yes.
What kind of processes is there to get that designation?
For myself professionally?
Yes.
That involves getting a master's degree in social work, and then you have to do certain kinds of clinical work with supervision for a couple of years and take a couple of tests to show that you know what you're doing. And
define clinical work.
That really means working directly with children and families, providing support or treatment, but I think it's important to make a distinction here that while I happen to be a licensed clinical social worker, the work that we do at the center is not that kind of treatment-based model. We really look at grief as a natural, normal process that anybody will go through when they experience a loss. And our approach is very much that we all have what we need to get through that difficult time, but it's easier to do that when you're with other people and you're getting some support. And that support comes from the other people in the peer support groups that we offer, and it also comes from our volunteers, who are amazing people from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life. What they have in common is that they've gone through our 30-hour training to learn how to facilitate in this peer support group model, and they want to be in a place where they can help others.
Very good. And now, grief. When I think of grief, I think of terms such as sadness, mm-hmm. depression, anxiety. What would define grief as opposed to just general sadness or depression?
Well, I certainly think that sadness and depression might be parts of grief for some people, but we really think about grief as a process that someone goes through when they lose someone that they love, when someone that they love dies, when someone that they love is dealing with a serious illness, when any kind of significant loss or change in your life could cause you to grieve. And there's many different feelings that go along with that. So that certainly could be sadness. You might feel depressed. Sometimes there's regret, there's guilt, anger. I mean, there's happy moments when you think of things you enjoyed about the person that died. Um, there there could be feelings of loneliness. There could be all kinds of different feelings. And those things change over time, from moment to moment. And then in that process of grief, we're also learning how to, or forming a new kind of relationship with the person that died, so we can integrate that loss and figure out how we want to move forward.
What might be a sign that a person's, be it grief, sadness, depression, whatever, is reaching a point where this is something that people need to be concerned about? You know somebody, maybe a family member, a friend, a neighbor, and you just have this sense that something is not right. What might be a sign that one could look for that might give them a clue that, hey, somebody may need to intervene here?
Well, I think that's a question that we get quite a lot, actually. And usually it's, specific, that someone's calling and saying, I'm concerned about
Yeah.
so and so, or this has happened in my family and I wonder about how to best support my child, or what's normal here, when should I be concerned? And the truth is that there's a wide range of normal reactions or responses to grief. And we usually try to have an individual, conversation with that person to ask them, what specifically are you concerned about? Are these the reactions or responses that you're seeing from your child consistent with how they normally deal with difficult situations? Is their reaction harmful to them or somebody else? Do you see that things are getting worse or more, the response is more intense or more frequent? Um, Things like nightmares, problems at school. So we try to understand a little bit about the concerns. Usually what I find is once you initiate that conversation, the person themselves has a pretty good idea of how they're doing and what might be helpful to them in the moment. And I think, as a friend or a concerned family member, that's the best way to go, is to say, I'm concerned about you. I've noticed that you're not interested in the activities or things you used to do, or when I call you, you never call me back. What do you need? How are you doing? Do you know that there's a place you could go to get support or ask questions?
Now, earlier, before the show started, you would mention something about people should be getting out there and be active, volunteer work.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about that? I know you had something to say.
Yeah.
Say it now.
I'll say it now. The volunteers at the center are really the heart of what we do. I was just actually tallying things up for our numbers for last year, and we had about 200 program volunteers, and most of those folks made a commitment to facilitating weekly peer support groups. So they came every week to sit down with children and families who are experiencing some type of loss. And we just simply couldn't do what we do without those
Now,
volunteers.
what kind of training do they go through in order to? I mean, I spent my career working with people and as a sales manager, and sitting down with a group of people in a support group, leading a support group, takes some training.
Yes, it
What
does.
what kind of training do you folks provide?
We provide a very intense 30-hour training, and it includes a lot of different aspects. I mean, of course, it's some of the things you would expect. This is what grief looks like. This is how children might experience grief and how it's related to their development. We talk about facilitation skills. They practice a lot of facilitating and how is working with adults different maybe than working with children. But there's also an element to it that's really about personal reflection, because not everybody, but many people who are called to volunteer at the center do so because of their own experiences of loss. Um, and and in any event, when people sit down in the rooms with children and families, they're going to hear some difficult stories. They're going to bear witness to difficult feelings, and we want to make sure that our volunteers are prepared for what that might bring up for them, so that it doesn't catch them off guard in the moment, and they're better able to support the participants through that. So there's a definite experiential aspect to our training that most people are, even though we tell them all about it ahead of time, can still surprise them. And it's beautiful when we have a chance, afterwards we meet with everybody individually, and we hear a lot from people how life-changing the training is for them. And people say, everybody should go through this training. This should be mandatory for just being a human, because it's really about how do you listen to somebody else and acknowledge what they have to say.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Can you repeat that,
Yeah.
please?
So you see the importance of what I'm saying,
Yes,
right?
I do. Yes, I do. And one of the things one of the words you said before, which struck me, and I use it quite a bit, with a little bit of a embellishment, you might say, normal. What I add on is, and what I believe to be the case, is that in the world that we live in today, we have a lot of new normals. Mm-hmm. What is the baseline about what's normal as opposed to what's a new normal? And is because it's new, is that necessarily better? And I realize it's a tough question. I don't even understand what the question is, and I'm the one who came up with it.
Well, let me try this for an answer. I think as far as what people's personal responses are, or grief responses are, I'm not sure that that's changed much. And like I said before, there's a very wide range of normal.
Yep.
But I think sometimes, or what we see, is that the greater context in which that's happening has changed. And so sometimes people feel like they're getting the message, your grief should be time limited, and that if you're not over it in a few months or a few weeks, or then there's something wrong with you. Or that this idea of, oh, you need closure. Well, there isn't any closure. You're going to be living with that loss forever. How you live with it will change, but the fact of having it won't change. And we also see that families are under a lot of other pressures. That there's financial pressures that families are facing. There's time crunches that people are facing. There may be a lack of support of friends and family if they're living far away or if they've moved, and that those are things that might be present in their life anyway, or might be secondary losses because of the death, a loss of income, or family has to move, the kid changes schools, and so all of these things are layered, and I think sometimes that can increase maybe the anxiety that people feel. Or just make the need for support that much more important, because maybe they don't have as many natural support systems in place.
Yep. One of the things that strikes me, and I've touched on it in previous shows, society is undergoing some very, very significant changes as of late.
Yeah.
And it's challenging enough for some cases for many, to accept the change that is taking place. What makes it even more challenging, and I think, and I mentioned before, suicide prevention, I believe my own personal belief is that with some of these changes that are taking place, the fact that the change is taking place, that's a big change. The fact that if you choose to be one who wants to hold on to the old value and you voice your opposition to the change, you demonize. You're racist, you're a bigot, you're all kinds of things. And I could see where that might push a person to do something that they should not do, such as suicide. Did I lose you?
Yeah.
It's not just the change that's taking place. It's the outcome of the change and how people now view you because you want to hold on to the old values.
I mean, that's definitely a different perspective than what we would take on suicide
Okay.
loss. And certainly we serve a number of families whose loss has been because of suicide. And overdose death is another one that we're seeing more of. And really what we try to come from a place of compassion and in recognizing that a person may take their life because they're in a place of hopelessness and they can't see another way out, that they're feeling out of options. And a lot of the time that's because of some kind of a mental illness. And so we really try to think of it as it's a health issue from our perspective. I mean, the same way that somebody might die from cancer. Yes, there's lots of treatment out there, and a lot of times that will be successful. Sometimes it won't. And the same is true for mental illness. And despite our best efforts with suicide prevention, sometimes people will still find themselves in that place.
Well, they run out of alternatives.
Yeah. But I think, that the things that are going on in our world, like I mentioned, the overdose loss group, do prompt us to think about what are other needs in our community. And this past year, we piloted a group that was specific to overdose loss, and that was very successful. The participants in that group appreciated the opportunity to be with others who've experienced that same loss, because similar to suicide, there's a lot of stigma that surrounds that, and there's some unique needs or experiences of people who've had that type of loss, and they want to be with other people who can really get it. So that's something that I think will continue. In our intercultural program, where we work with children whose families have resettled in Maine from war-torn countries and countries experiencing violence and persecution. That's actually not a new program. It's going to be in its 20th year, but
Really?
that came out of community needs. And unfortunately, I think given what's going on globally, that the need for that program is going to continue, and we know that it's growing.
I would venture to say that the need is going to become even more
Yeah,
dramatic.
absolutely. And so a lot of what we do, and another aspect of what we do is provide training and consultation to other people who work with children, so that it's not just about what happens for the kids an hour a week when they come to the center, but if you're trained in supporting grieving children, and the school teacher is trained in supporting grieving children, and the youth worker or the daycare provider, that all of us, every single person out there, everybody watching the show, you can be a person who supports a child, whether their experience has been the personal loss of a family member or a friend, or they've also had this additional loss, we call it collective loss, of losing their culture, losing their country, having to come here and make these great changes. It's not an easy thing to do, but we can all be part of creating that supportive community where that healing can happen.
Now, when I was doing some research on the topic, the 5 stages of grief. You want to talk about that for a little bit? The five stages, such as
we don't
denial.
we don't really use that approach.
Okay.
We talk more about the tasks of grieving and recognize that it's more of a cyclical thing, that we don't necessarily complete one task and go on to the next in some kind of order, but that we all need the first, but then I'll give them in an order, right? The first one is really about accepting the loss and understanding that this thing has happened. And the way that people, what do you have to understand? But I like to use the example of making that phone call that you're like, oh, I'd really like to tell my mom about my day. And then you have to remember, oh, wait a minute, I can't call my mom. My mom's died. And even as an adult, that I think is something we can relate to, that yes, of course, we know this thing has happened, the person has died, but it hasn't fully sunk in,
You have not fully accepted it yet.
Yeah, so that's one of them. The second one is to be able to feel the feelings that grief and loss bring. And it's very hard to process through those and get to a different place if you don't allow yourself to have the feelings. And a lot of times we'll see people who, oh, I think we're doing fine, or I think we're doing fine. But oftentimes people are in a state of numbness or shock right after a loss.
Might they be trying to convince themselves that they're doing fine?
Mm-hmm. And part of that is very protective, because those are going to be big feelings. Those are going to be painful feelings. And somehow our mind or spirit or whatever you want to call it has a way of allowing us to hold those off a bit until we're in a place where we can deal with them. And with kids, very frequently, we'll see a big show of emotion. And as an adult, we're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And the kid says, okay, can I go play now? That's the child's way of letting the feeling out, and then they can shift on to the next thing, and they'll come back to that feeling.
That might be a lesson. That might be a lesson that a more mature person should take from their child.
Maybe.
When you have something that's really bothering you, don't hold on to it.
And that's what the center allows, is for anything that needs to be expressed. Sometimes people may feel that they're burdening their friends or family. Oh, they don't want to hear me talk about this again. They may feel like they can't be honest they have to stay strong. They don't, because that could be upsetting to the other family members to see that they're not doing well, or they might have something that they feel embarrassed about or ashamed about how they're feeling, that they think they might be judged. A lot of times, we hear other people don't understand what I'm going through. So the center becomes that place where you can just lay it all out.
How would one go about getting involved with the center?
They would pick up the phone and give us a call. That's really the best way. And the phone number is 775-5216.
Unless I'm mistaken, which would not be outrageously wrong, but unless I'm mistaken, those numbers are scrolling under the screen right now.
Great. We encourage that because usually you have some questions. We can talk with you about exactly what we offer, what other kinds of support are available, and help make referrals. We can provide some resources and information over the phone. So once people learn about the peer support groups that we offer, if that sounds like something they think would be beneficial, we set up a time for them to come in and take a tour. We call it an initial family meeting. And that allows us to, on both sides, to make sure that they feel comfortable and that peer support will serve them. Because it's not going to be the right service for everybody. Some people don't want to be in a group, no thank you. Or some people might need more support than what we can offer. So the individual counseling or family counseling would be better before or in addition to the groups.
And you would advise them, if, after you make your assessment, if you think that they need more than what the center can provide, you would advise them as such and possibly make a referral to a professional.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing that we like people to know is that when you call a center, we try as best we can to have an actual real person answer the phone, so that sometimes it can be confusing of who do I talk to about this and who do I talk to about that. And we just, we're here, we want to be accessible, and we know that grieving families are dealing with so much already that we don't want to be another barrier.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And having having a human being to speak to might come as a surprise to some people.
It often does. Or, oh, thank you so much. I didn't expect you to call me back. Really? We try.
Well, good. Now, a child's handling of grief, while technically unprofessional, almost seems to be more effective than the way a lot of adults handle grief. A child, as you pointed out earlier, a child will cry, and after he or she is done crying, say, "Okay, can I go out and play now?" Would it be advisable for an adult to try and handle it like that, to just disregard it for a little while?
Well, I think adults do that in their own way. I mean, and children too. Oftentimes for people, going to work or going to school, having other things can take our mind off of our grief. But I think that as adults, we're products of our own upbringing and environment. So if we didn't grow up in a family where people felt they could talk about death and serious illness and loss, or showing emotions wasn't okay or permitted, then it's going to be really hard for us as our adult selves to do some of those things. And a lot of times, parents are so concerned about their children that maybe there's a tendency to set aside their own needs. So I think I guess I would say everybody needs this. They need the same things, but they'll find that in their own way.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I hate to say that something is better or worse. It's really about what is going to work.
My thought is
for
whether it's better or worse is an individual thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people it might work better than it might for others.
And there's all different, there are the emotional tasks of grieving related to the feelings, but there's also the instrumental ones, but those are the things that we do. So a lot of times you'll see people want to finish a project that their loved one had started, or do something in that person's name to honor their memory and keep their name alive. We see people who it helps them most to be busy, constantly doing something, whereas for somebody else it helps them most to be able to retreat for a while and take a break. So I think as the grieving person, we need to tend to both of those areas in our lives. You know, if my husband passed away and he was always the one that took care of the bills, well, guess what? I better figure I'm going to have to do that now. So that's a task that I have to take and figure out. But at the same time, I'm going to have the feelings that I need to process. So we have to tend to both of those aspects.
So if there's a person out there who is feeling a little bit of pressure because of grief, they should not feel alone.
They should not feel alone because they're not alone. Obviously, I think it's one of the great equalizers in this world because it's something that we've all experienced, we're all going to experience. And and though we can be reluctant to talk about it in some places, I mean, there is a place you could come. And a lot of people, of course, our name is the Center for Grieving Children, so many people assume that we only serve children.
That was going to be my next question.
But we do not. We also serve adults. We have parent and caregiver groups that meet at the same time as the children's groups. So the whole family, kids and teens, 3 to 18, and parents and caregivers can attend at one time.
What transpires in one of these support groups?
Well, I'll come back to that, but I
Okay.
just want to mention that we also have groups for young adults, 19 to 30. We have groups for bereaved parents. We have groups for young widowers, and partners as well. So we do have those adult services, and we have our tender living care program for families who are facing serious illness, and that serves children and teens 3 to 18, and has adult groups as well for parents and caregivers. So in the groups, if people join the group, it's an opportunity to be with others around your same age, so the kids groups are all divided by age, who've also experienced a loss. And the role of the facilitators in there is to create a safe place where people feel that they can talk about their experience, they can talk about the person who is ill, they can talk about the person who died, they can share their feelings, and give and get support from the other members of their group. So in the adult group, it is a lot of talking. People can come in and say, "You wouldn't believe the week that I had," or "This is what's on my mind. I'm really struggling with this." And in the children's groups, the facilitators are using a lot more of activities, play, artwork, writing, drawing, all kinds of different things as tools to help kids express themselves. So with the 3 to 6 year olds, maybe you read a book about feelings and talk about, well, have you had these feelings? How did you feel when your loved one died? How do you express those feelings? In the teen group, they've written songs and poetry that express their experience, and they can talk about that. It's in puppet shows, everything in between.
So the grief has the potential of exposing something inside of you that might not have been exposed in absence of the grief, which would be a positive outcome of the process, as I see it. And as you're nodding your head yes, so I assume you're at least initially agreeing with me.
Yes, it definitely exposes something that wouldn't have been exposed before. Although I think most people who would say that maybe they've grown in some way or it's changed their perspective would also say that they would give that up in a heartbeat to have the person back.
Understandable. Understandable. But it also is an opportunity for personal growth.
Yeah. And what we hope for people who come to the center is that it's restorative in some way, that they're not it's not about, you talked about sadness. It's not about being less sad. It's about finding hope again in the midst of your grief and in the midst of this monumental change in your life, so that you have a way of moving forward.
Which can be viewed as a way of honoring the person that you've lost.
And that comes back to those tasks, and that's one of them too, is to create a new relationship with the person that died, so that you do have that, they're a part of you in a different way.
Yep. It certainly is a challenging field that you chose to go into. Uh, I give you great credit for going into it, because I didn't know much about it beforehand, and I probably don't know a heck of a lot more about it now, other than the fact that you've given me an education of sorts and the research that I did. But I think and I'll speak for myself, it's an area that I never really gave much thought to. Now, some people would say, well, I never give much thought to any area. But it strikes me as being very important and probably very much overlooked
Yeah,
by a lot of people.
I would say, because it can make people very uncomfortable to talk about, for one, and that discomfort then can prevent them from engaging in conversations with kids or adults about it. But unfortunately, it's very common. 1 in 7 children and teens is going to experience the death of a parent or a sibling. And when you add in a grandparent, a friend, other significant adults in their lives, that number just goes up. And it has the potential to impact them in all aspects of their lives. And if they're not getting support, it can
Despite
be.
the fact that it's just a part of the maturation process, but it does offer significant challenges, more for some than others, more for some than it does for others.
Right. And the view that we take is that kids are are resilient. Like I said at the outset, that people
Yep.
have what they need to get through it, but let's help them do that. Let's not leave them there trying to figure it all out on their own with these questions. Is this weird? Is this normal? Am I doing this right? When we can help each other, and when that's boosting their resilience, that's building their assets and giving them what they need to get through a difficult time, so that it doesn't result in things like depression or conduct problems or substance use and all of these negative outcomes that we know can be a result, especially of parental bereavement.
Now, if there's one thing that you would like having people to hold on to that we've talked about today, what might that one thing be? And I'm thinking about, that Jack Palance I forget what movie it was, but you say there's one thing. What
Can I
might
have
that
two
one
things?
thing be? Okay, then you can have two things.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I'll have a bargain sale today. Two things.
Thank you. The first thing that I would say is, if somebody that you care about or yourself is experiencing a loss, it is okay to talk about it and ask them some questions. How are they doing? What do they need? And the second thing is, if you need any help with that, having the conversation or getting support, or you want to be a part of offering that to others, then we are just a phone call or a mouse click away, and we would love to hear from them.
Well, Susan might not know this yet. She might have a suspicion. But Susan did say earlier, off camera, that she might have a topic that she would like to have discussed on the show at some point in the future. And she opened the door, and I am one who likes to walk through doors that I don't know what's on the other side of. So I'm gonna play one of Steve Poulos' games. Susan's going to be a guest co-host of a show in the near future. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds great, and you will have me officially on film saying so.
That's easy for you to say now, but you never know what's going to happen. The show can be rather unpredictable. But Susan, thank you very much for showing up.
Thank you.
For being a
I
guest on the
enjoyed
show.
it very much.
I enjoyed it. I suspect the viewing public has enjoyed it. Hopefully they got some good information out of it. I know I did.
So I hope
And
so.
you were a very easy person to talk to.
Thank you.
It must be your Italian heritage.
I'd say.
Yes.
And my good training from the center.
And your good training from the center, yes. Well, folks, that's it. That's a wrap. The show is done. Have a great day. It's a beautiful one out there. Be safe. Have fun. Simplify your lives. Take advantage of those tools and opportunities that we have right in our own backyard. Centers for Grieving Children is one of them. Have a great day. Bye-bye.